My name is Robin Watson, and at 68 years old I never thought my own son would break my heart. Thomas was my world after his mother died. We were inseparable until Amanda entered his life. I gave them everything: money, time, babysitting, love. But yesterday, that text about leftover restaurant food changed everything. You know what hurts most? Being treated like an afterthought by the child you centered your entire life around. If you've ever felt taken for granted by the people you sacrificed everything for, stay with me. Drop a comment about whether you would have done what I did, and subscribe to join others who refuse to be doormats in their own families. I suppose I should start at the beginning. 15 years ago, my wife Elaine lost her battle with cancer. Thomas was just finishing his sophomore year of college when she passed. Those first few months were a blur of grief and paperwork. I remember sitting in our kitchen, surrounded by sympathy cards, wondering how I was supposed to keep going without her. But I had Thomas to think about. He was devastated by his mother's death, and I knew I had to be strong for him. I worked as a mechanical engineer for Johnson Manufacturing for over 30 years. I had opportunities for promotions that would have required relocating or extensive travel, but I always turned them down. Being there for Thomas was more important than climbing the corporate ladder. I coached his Little League team, never missed a school concert, and made sure dinner was on the table every night, even when deadlines at work were crushing me. Thomas was always a bright kid, smart as a whip with a natural talent for numbers, just like his mother. He got a full scholarship to State University for his undergraduate degree, then went on to get his MBA. I was so proud watching him walk across that stage in his cap and gown. Elaine would have been bursting with pride too. It was during his MBA program that Thomas met Amanda. She was studying international business, came from a wealthy family in Connecticut. The first time Thomas brought her home, she seemed pleasant enough. She complimented our modest home, asked questions about Thomas's childhood, and brought an expensive bottle of wine. But something felt off. The way her eyes scanned our living room, how she subtly corrected Thomas's table manners. I brushed it off as nerves or my own protectiveness. They dated for 2 years before getting married. The wedding was lavish, mostly paid for by her parents. My contribution barely made a dent in the final bill, but I gave what I could. I remember Amanda's father making a joke during his toast about how his daughter was marrying down, but at least Thomas had potential. People laughed, but it stung. Thomas just smiled tightly. After the honeymoon, I helped them with a down payment for their first home. It stretched my savings thin, but seeing Thomas settled in a nice neighborhood meant everything to me. I wanted him to have the security I had worked so hard to provide. Jacob came along 2 years later, followed by Emma 3 years after that. Becoming a grandfather was one of the greatest joys of my life. Jacob has my eyes, people say, and Emma has Elaine's laugh. The first time I held each of them in the hospital, I felt my heart expand in ways I never thought possible. But around this time, I started noticing subtle changes in Thomas. Our weekly calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. When we did talk, he seemed distracted, always in a rush. I told myself he was just busy with his new family and demanding job at the financial firm where he worked. Every parent expects their relationship with their child to evolve as they grow up and have families of their own. When I retired 3 years ago, I made the decision to sell the family home. It was too big for just me, and the maintenance was becoming difficult with my arthritis. More importantly, I wanted to be closer to Thomas and my grandchildren. The house had 30 years of memories, but I was ready for a new chapter. I found a nice 1-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from Thomas and Amanda. It was in a good neighborhood with a community center nearby. The complex had mostly retirees, so I thought I might make some new friends. Most importantly, I could be more involved in my grandchildren's lives. At first, everything seemed great. I picked Jacob up from preschool 3 days a week and watched Emma while Amanda went to her yoga classes. I fixed things around their house, taught Jacob how to ride a bike, and read endless princess stories to Emma. I felt useful, connected, part of a family again. But I started noticing little things. Amanda would sigh loudly when I arrived 5 minutes early to pick up the kids. If I brought them a small treat, She would comment about sugar and teeth and overindulgent grandparents. When I offered suggestions about Emma's persistent cough, Amanda cut me off, saying, "We have a pediatrician with an actual medical degree, Robin." The first Christmas after I moved closer, Thomas called to say they were opening presents at 7 a.m., not 9 as originally planned. By the time I arrived, most gifts had been unwrapped. Jacob ran to show me his new robot, but Amanda quickly redirected him to finish his breakfast. I sat on the couch with my coffee, feeling like an intruder rather than family. Despite these warning signs, I kept telling myself things would improve. Thomas had always been such a loving son. Surely he could see how his wife was treating me. I just needed to be patient and understanding. After all, marriage requires compromises, and I wanted Thomas to have a happy home. Looking back now, I realize I was blind to how bad things were getting. I was so afraid of losing my connection to Thomas and my grandchildren that I accepted treatment I never would have tolerated in any other relationship. But sometimes, it takes hitting rock bottom to finally see the truth. As the months passed, my involvement with Jacob and Emma settled into a routine. I took Jacob to soccer practice on Tuesdays and watched Emma on Thursday afternoons. The kids seemed genuinely happy to spend time with me, and those hours were the highlight of my week. Jacob would excitedly show me his latest Lego creation, while Emma always wanted to paint or draw together. Those precious moments made all the tension with Amanda seem worthwhile. But gradually, even these arrangements began to change. One Tuesday, I arrived to take Jacob to soccer, only to find out Amanda had already dropped him off with another parent. "Oh, I forgot to tell you we joined a carpool," she said, not looking particularly apologetic. The following Thursday, she mentioned that Emma had a playdate scheduled. "I sent you a text," she claimed, though no such message existed on my phone. These miscommunications happened more and more frequently. Sometimes I would drive to their house for a planned dinner, only to find they had already eaten. "We thought you weren't coming until later," Amanda would say, while Thomas looked uncomfortable but remained silent. One afternoon, I arrived early to pick up Jacob from school. As I approached the playground, I overheard Amanda talking to another mother. "My father-in-law is just so needy since his retirement," she was saying. "He has literally no life of his own, so he tries to insert himself into ours constantly. Thomas feels guilty, so we have to include him in everything." I froze, feeling as though I had been slapped. The other woman made sympathetic noises as Amanda continued. "The kids like him well enough, but he undermines my parenting at every turn. Last week, he gave Jacob ice cream right before dinner, after I specifically said no. For the record, Jacob had skinned his knee badly on the sidewalk. The ice cream was a small comfort while I cleaned and bandaged the wound. Amanda had been busy on a work call and hadn't even noticed her son was hurt. That evening, I tried to talk to Thomas about what I had overheard. We were in his garage, where I was helping him organize tools. "Son, I need to ask you something," I began. "Do you and Amanda feel that I'm intruding in your lives?" Thomas looked startled, then guilty. He focused intently on sorting screwdrivers. "Of course not, Dad. Why would you think that?" I told him what I had overheard. His face flushed. Amanda was probably just venting. "You know how it is. Sometimes parenting is stressful, and she needed to blow off steam. But is that how you feel too?" I pressed. "That I'm needy and have no life of my own?" "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Look, Dad, Amanda sometimes gets frustrated, but we both appreciate everything you do for us and the kids." But his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I knew then that on some level, he agreed with his wife. It was a punch to the gut. I finished helping him in silence, then went home and cried for the first time since Elaine's funeral. After that, I tried to create more space. I joined a book club at the community center. I reconnected with old colleagues for coffee. I even signed up for a watercolor class, something Elaine had always wanted us to do together. But the hurt lingered. The holidays that year were especially difficult. For Thanksgiving, Thomas called the day before to say dinner had been moved from 4 p.m. to 2 p.m. because Amanda's parents wanted to get back to their hotel early. I had to rush to finish the sweet potato casserole I had promised to bring, and when I arrived slightly late, Everyone was already seated and serving themselves. For Christmas, I spent days shopping for thoughtful gifts for everyone. For Thomas, I found a first edition of his favorite childhood book. For Amanda, an artisanal cookbook from that chef she always watched on TV. For Jacob, a telescope he had been talking about for months. For Emma, a handmade doll that looked just like her. I wrapped everything beautifully and brought the packages to their house on Christmas Eve as we had planned. When I arrived, Amanda looked flustered. "Oh, we were just about to call you. We decided to go to my parents' cabin for Christmas. We're leaving in an hour." I stood in their entryway, arms full of carefully wrapped presents, as they rushed around packing suitcases and snacks for the 3-hour drive. They took my gifts and added them to a pile they would apparently open at the cabin. My invitation to join them seemed like an afterthought, and when I declined, nobody tried very hard to change my mind. I spent Christmas Day alone, watching old movies and trying not to think about my family opening my presents without me. Thomas called briefly that evening, the children shouting distracted thanks in the background, before running off to play with their new toys. Perhaps most telling was my birthday in February. Thomas and I had always made a big deal of birthdays, even after Elaine was gone. It was our special tradition, but my 68th birthday passed without a call, a card, or even a text. 3 days later, Thomas sent a message. "Sorry about missing your birthday, Dad. Things have been crazy at work. Rain check on dinner?" That dinner never happened, and when I had a health scare in March, finding a suspicious lump that thankfully turned out to be benign, Thomas and Amanda's response to my hospital visit was a fruit basket delivered by a service, with a generic "Get well soon" card signed by all of them in Amanda's handwriting. It was around this time that the realization truly sank in. I was being taken advantage of but given no real place in the family. I was good enough to babysit on short notice, to fix leaky faucets and assemble furniture, to dog-sit their labradoodle when they took weekend trips. But I wasn't important enough to include in celebrations, to check on when I was ill, or even to remember on my birthday. The worst part was watching Thomas transform from the warm, considerate son I had raised into someone who stood by while his wife treated his father like an unpaid handyman and occasional babysitter. The Thomas I knew would never have allowed anyone to treat me this way. But marriage and ambition had changed him, or perhaps just revealed a side of him I had never wanted to see. Still, they were my only family. I told myself that maintaining a relationship with my grandchildren was worth swallowing my pride. Jacob and Emma loved me, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing them. So I continued the pattern, helping when asked, trying not to notice the growing disrespect, focusing on the moments of joy with the children. But even the strongest person has a breaking point, and mine was just around the corner. Last Friday, my phone rang while I was tending to my small balcony garden. Seeing Thomas's name on the screen brought a smile to my face. These calls had become increasingly rare. "Dad," Thomas exclaimed when I answered, sounding more animated than he had in months. "Guess what? I got the promotion. Senior Vice President of Client Relations." My heart swelled with pride. Thomas had been working toward this promotion for years, putting in long hours and sacrificing weekends. "That's incredible, son. Congratulations. I know how hard you've worked for this. The salary bump is huge," he continued excitedly, "plus stock options, a company car, and an executive parking spot. I still can't believe it." "You deserve it all," I said sincerely. "Your mother would have been so proud." My mind was already racing ahead to how we might celebrate. When Thomas got his MBA, we had gone fishing at Lake Simmons, his favorite childhood spot. When he landed his first big client, we had cigars on my back porch, something Elaine would have frowned upon but which had become our little tradition for major milestones. "We should celebrate," I suggested. "What about dinner this weekend? My treat. Anywhere you want to go." There was a slight pause. "Actually," Thomas said, his tone shifting subtly, "Amanda and I are going to do something special with the kids. You know, make it a whole family thing." I waited for the invitation, but it didn't come. Instead, Thomas quickly changed the subject to the details of his new responsibilities. We talked for a few more minutes before he said he needed to go. Amanda was calling him. "I'm really proud of you, son," I said before hanging up. And I was. Despite everything, seeing Thomas succeed professionally filled me with joy. I had raised a smart, capable man who was providing well for his family. But as the evening wore on, the absence of an invitation to whatever celebration they had planned began to gnaw at me. Wasn't I family too? I decided to text Thomas the next morning, just a casual message asking about their weekend plans, leaving the door open for him to include me. He never responded to that text. Saturday evening, while reheating leftover lasagna for my solitary dinner, I made the mistake of checking social media. There at the top of my feed was a photo posted by Amanda. Thomas, Amanda, Jacob, and Emma, all dressed up at the Capitol Grill, one of the most expensive restaurants in town. Thomas was beaming in a new suit, raising a champagne glass. The caption read, "Celebrating my amazing husband's promotion with our favorite people." I zoomed in on the photo and noticed they were at a large table. Sitting with them were Amanda's parents, her sister and brother-in-law, and even her grandmother who lived in a nursing home 2 hours away. They had gone to the trouble of bringing her to the celebration, but couldn't include me, who lived 20 minutes from their house. The lasagna turned to ash in my mouth. I set down my fork, no longer hungry. I scrolled through more photos. Thomas cutting into a massive steak, Jacob and Emma with elaborate desserts, Amanda's father making a toast, group shots with everyone looking happy and festive. In every image, an empty chair might as well have had my name on it. I tried calling Thomas, but the call went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What could I say? Why wasn't I invited to your celebration? I would sound pathetic, needy, exactly what Amanda had accused me of being. An hour later, my phone pinged with a text from Amanda. "Wish you could have been there. Thomas is so happy about this promotion. The kids had their first taste of lobster." Attached were more photos of the celebration I had been excluded from. Wish you could have been there. As if my absence was some unfortunate circumstance beyond anyone's control, rather than a deliberate decision to exclude me. I sat in my recliner, the TV playing unwatched in the background, turning the situation over in my mind. Had I done something to upset them? Was I truly so unpleasant to be around that they couldn't bear to have me at a family celebration? Or was I simply not considered important enough to include? None of the possible explanations brought any comfort. I eventually went to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich, unable to face the lasagna again. As I ate at my small kitchen table, I looked at the photos of Thomas and the kids that covered my refrigerator. In that moment, they seemed less like cherished memories and more like reminders of what I had been pushed out of. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining them all at that fancy restaurant, laughing and celebrating, while I sat home alone. I thought about all the Little League games I had never missed, all the nights I had helped Thomas with homework instead of going out with colleagues, all the career opportunities I had passed up to be present in his life. I had never once made him feel like an afterthought. Yet here I was, deliberately excluded from one of the proudest moments of his professional life. By morning, my sadness had hardened into something else, a growing realization that my place in Thomas's life had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the father he turned to in moments of joy or sorrow. I was a convenience, useful for childcare and household repairs, but not essential to their family unit. I made coffee and toast, going through the motions of my morning routine while feeling hollowed out inside. I checked my phone, half hoping for a message from Thomas explaining everything. There was nothing. I was rinsing my coffee cup when the text arrived that would change everything. The notification sound made me jump slightly. I dried my hands on a dish towel before picking up my phone. It was a text from Amanda. "Dad, don't forget to finish the leftovers in the fridge before they go bad. We brought so much home from the restaurant last night." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. They had excluded me from their celebration dinner, but now expected me to eat their leftover food, like I was some sort of charity case, or perhaps more accurately, a disposal service for their unwanted scraps. My hand trembled slightly as I set the phone down on the counter. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the refrigerator and opened it. Sure enough, there were 3 plastic containers on the top shelf, neatly labeled in Amanda's precise handwriting: ribeye, truffle mac, and lobster tail. The sight of those containers, filled with food from a meal I hadn't been invited to, sent a wave of humiliation through me so powerful that I had to grip the refrigerator door to steady myself. In that moment, everything crystallized with perfect clarity. This wasn't just thoughtlessness. This was a pattern of systematic disrespect that had been building for years. I closed the refrigerator and leaned against it, memories flooding back with new perspective. The time Amanda asked me to dog sit while they took a beach vacation, but didn't tell me until the day before they left. The numerous occasions when Thomas brought over broken items for me to fix without so much as a thank you. The Christmas I spent alone while they went to Amanda's parents' cabin. My forgotten birthday. Each incident on its own could be explained away. People get busy. Details slip through the cracks. Assumptions are made. But viewed as a pattern, there was only one conclusion. I had allowed myself to be treated as less than I deserved. I had been so afraid of losing my connection to Thomas and my grandchildren that I had accepted increasingly disrespectful behavior. And now this. Leftovers from a celebration I should have been part of, offered to me like I should be grateful for their scraps. I looked around my small apartment. Every aspect of my life since retirement had been organized around their needs. I had moved to this neighborhood to be closer to them. My schedule revolved around babysitting and school pickups. My savings had been depleted helping with their down payment and various expenses over the years. What did I have to show for it? A son who didn't stand up for me. A daughter-in-law who treated me like the help rather than family. Occasional time with my grandchildren, doled out when it was convenient for their parents. My phone pinged again. Another text from Amanda. The ribeye is Thomas's favorite, so maybe start with the other containers first. That was it. Something inside me snapped, not in an angry, violent way, but in the quiet, resolute manner of someone who has finally had enough. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I would no longer accept this treatment. I deserved better. Elaine would be furious if she could see how our son and his wife were treating me, and how I had allowed it to happen. I picked up my phone and typed a simple response. Okay. That single word contained none of the turmoil and resolution swirling inside me. But as I hit send, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The return of my self-respect. I was taking back control of my life. Starting now. I looked again at my apartment, seeing it through new eyes. The photos of Thomas and his family dominated every surface. The calendar on the wall was marked with their activities and my babysitting schedule. Even my weekly shopping list included items they had requested I pick up for them. My life had become a subsidiary of theirs, and I had allowed it to happen. No more. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the large suitcase from under the bed, the one I hadn't used since Elaine and I went to Hawaii for our 30th anniversary. I set it on the bed and opened it, the decisive click of the latches feeling like punctuation at the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It was time to show Thomas and Amanda that I wasn't a doormat to be walked on, or a convenience to be used and discarded. I wasn't just Grandpa Robin who would always be there no matter how they treated me. I was Robin Watson, a man who deserved respect and consideration, especially from his own family. As I began to pack, I felt a strange mix of sadness, anxiety, and something else that took me a moment to identify: liberation. For too long, I had subordinated my needs and feelings to maintain peace with Thomas and Amanda, but that peace had come at too high a price: my dignity. It was time to show them exactly what they were losing by taking me for granted, and perhaps, in the process, remind myself of who I really was. With newfound clarity, I began formulating a plan. This wouldn't be a hasty, emotional exit. I wanted my absence to send a clear message, one that couldn't be ignored or dismissed as an overreaction. I needed Thomas and Amanda to truly understand what they had done. First, I called my old friend Frank Miller. We had worked together at Johnson Manufacturing for 20 years before he relocated to Phoenix for a better position. We still talked monthly, and he had repeatedly invited me to visit. "Robin, good to hear from you." Frank's familiar voice boomed through the phone. "How are things in the frozen north?" I took a deep breath. "Not great, Frank. I need a change of scenery." "That standing invitation to visit still open?" There must have been something in my voice that conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because Frank didn't joke or ask questions. "Of course it is. Our guest house is yours, for as long as you need it. When are you thinking of coming?" "Today," I said firmly. "I can be on the road within a few hours." There was a brief pause. "Must be serious. Is everything okay with your health?" "My health is fine. It's my relationship with Thomas that's terminal." I gave him a condensed version of recent events, ending with the leftover food text. Frank whistled low. "That's cold, Robin. You never treated that boy that way." "No, I didn't," I agreed. "And I won't be treated this way anymore. The guest house is all yours, buddy. Sandra will be thrilled to have you. Just text me when you're getting close." With accommodation arranged, I turned to practical matters. I packed enough clothes for several weeks, along with important documents, medications, and a few cherished possessions. Elaine's wedding ring, photo albums from Thomas's childhood, the watch my father had given me when I graduated college. Next, I called my financial advisor, Margaret. I had given Thomas access to my accounts after Elaine died, in case anything happened to me. It was time to change that arrangement. "I'd like to remove my son as an authorized user on all my accounts," I told her after explaining the situation. "And I want to discuss changing my will as well." "That's a significant change, Mr. Watson," Margaret said cautiously. "Are you sure you don't want to think about this a bit longer?" "I've been thinking about it for years," I replied. "I just didn't recognize it until today. Can you make those changes immediately?" She confirmed that she could, and we scheduled a video call for the following week to discuss more permanent changes to my estate planning. Next, I called my neighbor Judith, a retired teacher who lived across the hall. Judith and I had become friends over the past 3 years, occasionally sharing meals or watching British murder mysteries together. She was straightforward and reliable. "Judith, I need a favor," I said when she answered. "I'm going away for a while, and I need someone to keep an eye on my apartment." "Everything okay, Robin?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "It will be," I assured her. "I just need some time away. Would you mind checking my mail and making sure everything looks okay once a week or so?" "Of course," she agreed. "But this seems sudden. Are you sure you're all right?" "I'm better than I've been in years," I told her, and surprisingly, it was true. Making the decision to stand up for myself felt right in a way nothing had for a long time. With the practical arrangements in place, I sat down at my small writing desk and took out a sheet of stationery. Elaine had always insisted that important messages should be handwritten. This was certainly important. "Dear Thomas," I began, then paused, considering my words carefully. This letter needed to express years of hurt without sounding bitter or vindictive. I wanted Thomas to understand the impact of his actions, not just feel guilty or defensive. I wrote steadily for nearly an hour, filling 3 pages with my neat engineer's handwriting. I described specific incidents that had hurt me, acknowledged my role in allowing the situation to continue, and expressed my deep disappointment not just in how he had treated me, but in how he had allowed his wife to treat me. "I raised you to be a man who stands up for what's right," I wrote toward the end. "I never thought I would need to be protected from your indifference. The father who taught you to ride a bike, who stayed up all night with you when you had nightmares, who celebrated every accomplishment no matter how small, deserves better than to be an afterthought in your life. I deserve better, and until you recognize that, I need to step away." I signed it simply Dad, folded the pages, and placed them in an envelope with Thomas's name on it. As the afternoon progressed, I completed my preparations. I removed all the photos from my refrigerator and walls, packing some and leaving others in a neat stack on the dining table. I gathered all the toys and books that I kept for Jacob and Emma's visits and boxed them up. I canceled the standing order for Jacob's favorite ice cream that I always kept in my freezer. Then I turned my attention to the 3 containers of leftovers in my refrigerator. Taking them out, I set a place at my dining table with my best dishes, crystal wine glass, and silver flatware, all wedding gifts from 40 years ago. I arranged the containers in the center of the table and placed the envelope with Thomas's letter propped against them. From a folder in my desk, I retrieved copies of checks and bank statements showing financial assistance I had provided over the years. $20,000 for their down payment, $5,000 for Thomas's MBA textbooks, $3,000 for their furnace repair last winter, countless smaller amounts. I laid these beside the letter. Finally, I printed out photos I had saved from social media. Thomas and Amanda's anniversary dinner I hadn't been invited to. The day they took the children to Disney World without telling me until they returned. Christmas morning at Amanda's parents' house. Each represented an exclusion, a time when I had been pushed outside the circle of family they presented to the world. Looking at the tableau I had created, I felt no vindication, only sadness. This wasn't how family was supposed to be. This wasn't what I had modeled for Thomas throughout his life, but perhaps it would finally make him see what had been happening all along. I took one last look around the apartment where I had lived for 3 years, never quite making it feel like home because I had been so focused on being available for Thomas and his family. I picked up my suitcase and a small duffel bag with essentials. At the door, I removed my key to Thomas's house from my keyring and added it to the display on the table. As I locked my apartment door behind me, I felt a complex mixture of grief, resolution, and strange, burgeoning hope. I was 68 years old, starting over in many ways. It was terrifying but also exhilarating. For the first time in years, I was putting myself first. I loaded my bags into my 4-year-old Toyota Camry and started the engine. As I pulled away from the apartment complex, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Part of me expected to feel regret or doubt, but instead, I felt the tension I had been carrying for years begin to dissolve. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least I was driving with dignity intact. The 6-hour drive to Phoenix gave me plenty of time to think. I watched the landscape change from the familiar Midwestern suburbs to the desert terrain of Arizona, feeling like the transformation mirrored my own internal journey. With each mile, the grip of anxiety and hurt loosened slightly. I called Frank when I was about an hour away, and he gave me directions to his home in a pleasant community on the outskirts of Phoenix. As I pulled into his driveway, Frank and his wife Sandra came out to greet me, their warm smiles a balm to my wounded spirit. "Robin Watson, as I live and breathe," Sandra said, giving me a firm hug. "You look like you've been through the ringer, but we'll fix that." Frank clapped me on the shoulder and grabbed my suitcase. "The guest house is all set up. Come on, I'll show you." Their guest house was actually a converted pool house, simple but comfortable with a bedroom, bathroom, small kitchen, and sitting area. Large windows looked out on their garden and pool, and the desert mountains beyond. "This is perfect," I told them sincerely. "I can't thank you both enough." "Stay as long as you need," Sandra assured me. "We're having lasagna for dinner at 6. Come up to the main house when you're settled." Left alone, I unpacked my few belongings, placing Elaine's photo on the nightstand. "Well, this is a new adventure," I said to her image. Not exactly how I pictured retirement, but here we are. Dinner with Frank and Sandra was the most relaxed meal I'd had in months. We reminisced about old times, carefully avoiding the topic of Thomas until the meal was nearly over. Finally, Frank asked gently, "Have you heard anything from them yet?" I checked my phone. No calls from Thomas, but there were several text notifications. I opened the messaging app to find an increasing series of messages from both Thomas and Amanda. 5:32 p.m. "Amanda, are you coming for dinner Friday? Jacob has a soccer game Sunday you promised to attend." 6:15 p.m. "Thomas, Dad, are you around? We need to talk about Jacob's birthday party next month." 7:40 p.m. "Amanda, Robin, please confirm you're still taking the kids on Saturday. I have an appointment." 8:28 p.m. "Toms, Dad, call me when you get this. Important." 9:03 p.m. "Thomas, Dad, we're at your apartment. Where are you? Getting worried." 9:17 p.m. "Thomas, Dad, Seriously, call me right now. 9:34 p.m. Thomas. What is all this stuff on your table? What's going on? Call me. 9:45 p.m. Amanda. Robin, this is completely inappropriate. You're scaring the children. Call Thomas immediately. 9:52 p.m. Thomas, I read your letter. Please call me. We need to talk about this. 10:10 p.m. Thomas, Dad, where are you? At least let me know you're safe. The messages continued, growing increasingly frantic. I showed the phone to Frank and Sandra. They found your display, Frank observed. Good. That was the point, wasn't it? I nodded, trying to imagine the scene in my apartment. Thomas and Amanda would have used their key when I didn't answer the door. Perhaps they brought Jacob and Emma along, expecting a typical evening visit. Instead, they found my carefully arranged tableau of evidence and absence. Thomas would have opened the letter first, his expression changing as he read. Amanda would have examined the financial receipts, perhaps for the first time understanding just how much support I had provided over the years. They would have looked at the photos, the physical proof of all the times they had excluded me from family events, and the leftovers, still sitting untouched in their containers, would have taken on a symbolic significance impossible to ignore. I could picture Thomas trying to explain it away at first. Dad's just upset about the promotion dinner. He'll cool off. But as they looked around my apartment, noticing the removed photos, the packed-up toys, the emptied refrigerator, the reality would have sunk in. This wasn't a temporary tantrum. This was a line drawn in the sand. I could almost see Amanda's initial dismissive attitude giving way to concern as she realized what my absence might mean for their childcare arrangements, their home repairs, their emergency support. Thomas would be feeling genuine worry by now, mixed with defensive guilt. Are you going to respond? Sandra asked, breaking into my thoughts. I considered the question carefully. Not tonight, I decided. They need time to really sit with this, to feel what it's like when I'm not automatically available. I'll text Thomas tomorrow to let him know I'm safe but need space. Frank nodded approvingly. Smart. Make them sweat a little. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in years. The desert, quiet, a stark contrast to the constant noise of my apartment complex. When I woke, the sun was streaming through the windows, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no immediate pressure to check my phone or rush to meet someone else's schedule. I made coffee in the small kitchen and took it outside to a patio chair, watching the desert come alive with morning light. My phone continued to buzz with notifications, but I let it sit. This morning was for me. Around noon, I finally picked up the phone. 23 missed calls and over 40 text messages. I bypassed them all to send a single text to Thomas. I am safe. I need time to myself. Please respect that. We'll contact you when I'm ready to talk. Then I turned off notifications and put the phone away. The next few days developed a peaceful rhythm. Mornings with coffee on the patio, walks in a nearby nature preserve, dinners with Frank and Sandra, who respected my need for both company and solitude. I began to remember interests and hobbies long set aside. I borrowed books from Frank's extensive library, started sketching the desert landscape, even helped Sandra with her vegetable garden. 1 week after my arrival, I finally felt ready to check my messages again. Among the many texts and voicemails was one that particularly caught my attention, sent 3 days after I left. Dad, I understand why you left. I read your letter multiple times. You're right about everything. I've let you down badly. When you're ready, I want to talk. Just me, not Amanda. I'm so sorry. It was the first acknowledgement from Thomas that he recognized his role in the situation. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. 1 month into my stay at Frank and Sandra's guest house, the raw wound of Thomas and Amanda's treatment had begun to heal into something more manageable. I had established a new routine that focused on my own well-being for the first time in years. I joined a senior center with an active social calendar, made friends with Frank and Sandra's neighbors, and even started volunteering at a local elementary school's reading program, which helped fill the ache of missing Jacob and Emma. The distance, both physical and emotional, had given me perspective I couldn't find when I was entangled in the day-to-day dynamics with Thomas and Amanda. I had become too available, too eager to please, too willing to overlook disrespect. In trying to stay connected to my son and grandchildren, I had surrendered my dignity inch by inch, until there was almost nothing left. Frank noticed the change in me one evening as we sat watching the sunset from his back patio. "You look 10 years younger than when you showed up here," he observed, handing me a cold beer. "Phoenix agrees with you." I smiled, realizing he was right. The constant tension in my shoulders had eased. I was sleeping better, eating better, even standing straighter. "It's not just Phoenix," I told him. "It's remembering who I am outside of being Thomas's father or Jacob and Emma's grandfather." I lost myself somewhere along the way. Sandra joined us, settling into a chair with her iced tea. "Have you thought about what comes next? You know you're welcome here as long as you want, but you might want something more permanent eventually." The question had been on my mind too. "I'm considering looking for a place here," I admitted. "Not right away, but eventually. I don't think I can go back to living 20 minutes from Thomas and Amanda, always available but never truly included." They nodded understandingly, and we sat in companionable silence as the desert sky transformed from blue to pink to deep purple. This was what friendship should feel like, I thought. Mutual respect, genuine care, space to be yourself. The next morning, I was reading the newspaper in the guest house when my phone rang. It was Judith, my neighbor from back home. "Robin," she said without preamble, "your son is here in Phoenix. He just stopped by the apartment looking for you, and I told him you were staying with friends here. I hope that was okay." My heart rate accelerated. How did he seem? Honestly, terrible. Like he hasn't been sleeping. He was very polite, but I could tell he's really worried about you. I thanked Judith for the information and called Frank immediately. Sure enough, Thomas had already contacted him and was on his way over. "I told him he could come by," Frank said apologetically. "I figured it was time. But Sandra and I will make ourselves scarce so you can talk privately." 30 minutes later, Frank texted that Thomas had arrived. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked up to the main house. Thomas was standing in Frank's living room, looking out the window. He turned when I entered, and I was shocked by his appearance. He had lost weight, there were dark circles under his eyes, and his normally impeccable clothes were wrinkled. He looked like a man who had been through an emotional wringer. "Dad," he said, his voice catching. He took a step toward me, then stopped, uncertain. "Hello, Thomas," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rush of conflicting emotions. "You look tired." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I haven't slept well since you left." We stood awkwardly for a moment before I gestured to the couch. "Let's sit down." Once seated, Thomas immediately began speaking, the words tumbling out. "Dad, I am so sorry. Everything in your letter was true. I've been a terrible son. I let Amanda dictate our relationship with you, and I stood by while she treated you disrespectfully. I have no excuse." "Where is Amanda now?" I asked. "Home with the kids. She wanted to come, but I told her this needed to be between us first." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Things have been tense since you left. Your departure forced me to see things I've been ignoring for years." I nodded but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "When we found your apartment that night," he paused, swallowing hard. "Seeing everything laid out like that, the photos, the financial records, your letter, those damn leftovers. It was like being hit with everything at once. I couldn't deny it anymore or make excuses. That was the point," I said quietly. "I know, and it worked." His eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. The kids miss you terribly. I miss you. Even Amanda realizes how much we took you for granted." I considered his words carefully before responding. "Thomas, I didn't leave to punish you or to force an apology. I left because I finally recognized that I deserved better treatment than I was receiving. I needed to remove myself from a situation that was damaging my self-respect." "I understand," he said, looking down at his hands. "And you're right. You deserve so much better than how we treated you. I raised you to be a man of integrity," I continued, "to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, to treat people with respect, especially those who have shown you nothing but love. Somewhere along the way, you forgot those lessons." Thomas nodded, tears now flowing freely. "I did. I got caught up in my career, in pleasing Amanda, in a lifestyle that seemed to require pushing you to the periphery. It's no excuse, but I lost sight of what truly matters." We talked for hours that afternoon, diving deep into patterns that had developed over years. Thomas admitted that Amanda had always been jealous of his close relationship with me, seeing it as competition rather than a blessing for their children. He acknowledged that he had chosen the path of least resistance, gradually allowing her to dictate the terms of my involvement in their lives. "I'm not blameless either," I told him. "I should have addressed this years ago instead of accepting increasingly disrespectful treatment. I was so afraid of losing my connection to you and the kids that I became a doormat." As the afternoon turned to evening, our conversation shifted from the past to the future. "So what happens now?" Thomas asked. "Will you come back home?" I shook my head. "No, Thomas. At least not to live near you again. I'm building a new life here, one that's about more than being available to babysit or fix things. I'm considering looking for an apartment in Phoenix." His face fell, but he nodded. "I understand. But will you at least consider visiting? The kids ask about you every day." Eventually I agreed. "But things need to change first. I won't return to the way things were." We established new boundaries that evening. If I visited, it would be on my terms, not as an on-call babysitter or handyman. Any disrespect from Amanda would result in my immediate departure. Thomas would need to demonstrate that he could stand up for me and our relationship. Before Thomas left to fly home the next morning, we hugged tightly. "I love you, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to make this right." "I love you too, son," I replied. But love isn't enough without respect. Over the following months, Thomas worked to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. We had weekly video calls, just the two of us at first, then occasionally including Jacob and Emma, whose excited faces brought both joy and a twinge of sadness for the time lost. Amanda made overtures as well, though I suspected her motivations were more practical than genuine. Without my regular babysitting and household help, their carefully balanced life had become more complicated. Moreover, my financial advisor had informed them that I had changed my will and account access, which had apparently been a significant wake-up call regarding the material aspects of our relationship. 3 months after Thomas's visit, I found a small but comfortable condo in a Phoenix retirement community, with an active social calendar and beautiful desert views. Frank and Sandra helped me move in, and for the first time since Elaine died, I felt like I was creating a home that was truly mine, not just a satellite orbiting around Thomas's family. 6 months after my departure, I agreed to visit Thomas and his family for a long weekend. We met on neutral ground, at a vacation rental halfway between our homes. The reunion with Jacob and Emma was emotional. They ran to me with shrieks of delight, and for a moment, all the hurt and anger dissolved in the pure joy of holding my grandchildren again. Amanda was noticeably more respectful, though there remained an underlying tension between us. During the weekend, I observed Thomas gently but firmly correcting her when she made a dismissive comment about my new hobby of desert photography. "Dad's photos are amazing," he said clearly. "I've already framed 2 for my office." It was a small moment, but significant. That visit was followed by others, carefully spaced and always with clear boundaries. Thomas and the children came to Phoenix several times, staying in a hotel nearby and spending days exploring the desert with me. Amanda sometimes came, sometimes didn't, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the convenient grandfather eager to please at any cost. I was Robin Watson, a man with his own life and interests, who chose to share his time with family that respected him. Thomas and I eventually began family therapy sessions during his visits to Phoenix, working with a counselor who specialized in adult family relationships. These sessions helped us communicate more effectively and understand the patterns that had led to our estrangement. Now, 1 year after that fateful text about leftovers, I sit on my patio watching the sunset paint the desert mountains gold and pink. My phone pings with a text from Thomas. Dad, booked flights for the kids and me for spring break next month. Amanda has a work commitment, so it will just be us. Hope that works for you. I smile as I type back. Perfect. Looking forward to it. Our relationship isn't what it once was, and perhaps it never will be again. But it's honest now, built on mutual respect rather than obligation and convenience. The greatest lesson I've learned through all of this is that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. By accepting disrespect, I wasn't doing Thomas any favors. I was enabling behavior that diminished both of us. Now I understand that true family relationships must be reciprocal. Love without respect is incomplete. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to say enough and walk away, even from the people you love most. Has something like this happened to you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about life's difficult lessons. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for your worth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the courage to honor yourself in all your relationships.